Hello, thank you all for joining today's webcast. We are very excited to be sharing the key findings from our 2017 Smart Marketing for Engineers research report. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's test out that questions pane that we'll be using throughout the webinar so everyone knows how to use it and to make sure that we can see your entries. Let me know where you're listening from, what city and what country you're attending from. And if you're with a group, include who's with you, sales, marketing, business leadership, and how many are in your group. Go ahead and type in your answers into that question pane now. Oh, there we go. I see we have someone from the UK, someone from California, South Dakota. So we have a lot of US attendees here from all over the country. Wow, Chicago. Looks like we have one from Indiana, North Carolina, Missouri, Austin. Hey, that's where we're recording from at least. I see another UK. Great. So we are all over the place. Finland. All right. Denmark, Israel, Canada. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join the webinar with us today. So I think we're ready to start. Let's look at our agenda for today's webinar. All right. So we're going to start with some housekeeping details. I'll introduce our speakers who will be presenting the research, covering our methodology, summary findings, audience demographics, and the research findings. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So as we go through the data, be sure to jot your questions down to ask during this time. You can also always submit them to the questions pane, and I'll hold them for that Q&A session. At the end, we'll also provide some more information on how to connect with us and learn more about marketing to engineers. Let's review a few logistics. Okay, so here, this is what your view as an attendee looks like. In that upper right-hand corner, you should see your control panel. And to the left is the screen where you'll be viewing today's slides. This is a closer look at that control panel. By default, when you join the webinar, you joined over your computer's mic and speakers. You can also call in over the phone if you prefer that. So if so, just select telephone in that audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity again to submit text questions to our presenters by typing your questions into that questions pane that we just tested out. So send in your questions at any time and we'll collect them and address them during that Q&A session. For those of you who haven't done it yet, go ahead and type in, let us know where you're listening from, if you're with a group, and just share with us who's attending. And then also, if you have any technical issues during the presentation, email me, that's my email address on the screen, Erin@trewmarketing.com. and I'll be happy to help you out. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Rebecca Geyer is the CEO and co-founder of Trew Marketing. Named by the Wall Street Journal one of the 10 most innovative entrepreneurs in America, she's worked across enterprise and small business in industries including industrial control and manufacturing, military aerospace, test and measurement, embedded design, and information technology. Following the popularity of her speaking and online writing, in 2015, Geyer published her debut book, Smart Marketing for Engineers, an inbound marketing guide to reaching technical audiences. Linda Uslaner is Director of Product Management for IEEE GlobalSpec Media Solutions. As a digital strategist, she manages a portfolio of products including Engineering360.com, e-newsletters, programmatic and content offerings, generating revenue and pipeline for electronics and industrial suppliers. And Amber Colleen is the Director of Marketing for IEEE GlobalSpec Media Solutions. In this role, she oversees all content creation, sales enablement, thought leadership, and branding messaging, as well as public relations, advertising, and demand generation. And now I will turn it over to Amber.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thanks to everyone for attending. We really have a full house for today's webinar, which at least shows to me that there's lots of marketers and business leaders who are really seeking information to help them market to what we know is a really unique, skeptical, and data-driven audience, and that you're interested in data that's going to help both you and your colleagues and teams market more effectively. So again, thank you so much for being here today. Let me first walk briefly through the purpose for this research and our methodology, and then I will go ahead and turn things over to Rebecca and Linda. So marketers in charge of targeting technical audiences are oftentimes grappling with that shift toward online and content marketing, and also how to apply that approach effectively toward an engineering audience. So they need to understand what content engineers consume, why they look for it, and really how they find it. So while research, as we know, exists in depth in both the consumer and the more broad B2B online and content marketing space, there's somewhat of a gap in terms of taking that deeper dive into this area to educate and inform marketers on the most effective ways to target more highly technical audiences. So as a result, this research is designed to examine the content, search, and online preferences of today's engineers, so companies like yours can determine how to most effectively engage with this audience. So when we undertook this study, we also took a deeper dive into the buy cycle of the engineer, so we can help you learn more about the buyer's journey, including things like the number of interactions they prefer to have with a vendor before they go ahead and engage directly with your sales team. And we also wanted to see where there were differences in engineers' research and buying behaviors by both age groups and regions of the world. So for this study, IEEE GlobalSpec and Trew Marketing partnered together to survey engineers and technical professionals, and we looked both in North America and worldwide in a variety of industries ranging from manufacturing to consumer electronics, automotive, and aerospace. So I'll get through some of the details of that respondents profile in just a minute, but first of all, I wanted to just give a little bit of a snapshot as to our methodology. So we chose survey respondents from the IEEE GlobalSpec and the Trew Marketing databases, and we asked them to participate in a brief 8 to 9 minute online survey. This was a web-based survey, and we collected the data in July of this year. Very much targeted to engineers and technical professionals. We wanted to make sure, again, that we were hitting this appropriate audience. And in total, we received nearly 900 completed surveys. So let's take a closer look at that respondent profile. In terms of age, we saw the respondents relatively evenly distributed. We saw the greatest percentage falling within that 36 to 55 years of age group, but we did see a good turnout both in the 25 to 35 as well as the professionals ages 56 to 65. Primary job function, as expected, the majority of respondents held engineering positions, followed by R&D and general management and corporate leadership. Industries were varied. We saw manufacturing making up the largest single component, followed shortly by engineering services. So between the two of them, they made up nearly half of respondents' industries. In terms of geographic location, we were also relatively evenly split. We saw the US and Canada come in first, and then we also had a strong showing in different areas around the world, which will allow us to show you some specific data by region. And if you're wondering if these respondents matter to you, you can see that they are overwhelmingly involved in the purchasing process, either as an influencer or a decision maker. So before I pass this over to Rebecca, I just want to take you through a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to give you data and insight surrounding the top research findings that we have listed here. First, our research shows that engineers most value things like case studies, ebooks, books, and white papers when seeking technical information for their work. And we'll share with you the different types of content they prefer and how that breaks down in terms of different geographic regions. Additionally, we're going to explore the different types of content that they prefer, specifically online resources. As we know, content is king, so we'll discuss with you how your target audience is most likely to do business with companies that are ahead of the curve when it comes to content production and distribution. On the content distribution side, we found that engineers rely heavily on e-newsletters to stay up to date on content, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And when it comes to the buyer's journey, our research shows that the majority of the engineer's buying process occurs online. And related to this, the majority also indicate that they have multiple interactions with a vendor before talking directly with them. So with that introduction, let's dive into the data. And Rebecca, I'm going to pass this along to you.
Okay, super. Thanks, Andrew, or thanks, Amber. Wow, You guys, we have a lot of people that registered for this webinar. We have over 520 people from North America, from Europe, other regions, from the data that Amber just shared. And so many of you guys are here today in the live webinar. And it looks like more are joining as we're getting into this first part of the webinar. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. This is awesome. So, you know, all of us at Trew, IEEE GlobalSpec, all of you on this call, we're business leaders, we're marketers, we're salespeople. We're all trying to determine the most effective ways to invest in marketing to drive performance throughout our pipeline, to traffic, leads, opportunities, and ultimately what we all care about most, about revenue. So it's interesting, you know, we're no longer in control of where and when and how our buyer, the engineer, hears and engages with our message. The buying process and as a result, marketing and sales have completely transformed. And so today, the buyer is squarely in control. And we have committed at Trew over the last several years of conducting research that provides data like the findings that Amber just covered and Linda and I are going to go into in more detail to help us all be smarter about the marketing investments that we're making. And so I just wanted to take a second to say how excited we are at Trew to be partnering with IEEE GlobalSpec, and a big thanks to Amber and Linda and all of the team behind you guys for your partnership and for making this all, the research and the webinar today and the report that's coming out next week, all happen. All right, so let's get into the data. All right, so of the findings that we want to highlight in this webinar, we thought we'd start with content. I like to use, when I think about content in your website, I like to use an analogy of a car and the fuel. So as I often say, a company's website, it is the #1 most important marketing investment that you can make. So as we think about the relationship between your website and content, a great way to think about it is your website is the engine. It's the engine that around all of marketing and to a large extent, and really more and more sales programs are ultimately going to impact your pipeline. But if you just have a really nice looking car with a high performing engine that has no fuel in it, it's going to look really nice, but it's not really going to perform for you. It's not going to be able to go anywhere. It has to have fuel to perform. And your content is really, it is that fuel. It brings life and momentum to your website and to your entire marketing and sales pipeline. From earning that first visit, building trust, converting the visitor to a lead, building preference, all the way down to helping and enabling sales to do their job. So to learn about content preferences, we asked several different questions, a few that we're going to cover here today. So the first that we're going to talk about is engineers' most valued content types. And then the second we're going to talk about is, okay, here's the content that they prefer, and then where do they prefer, where do they go find that content? So what are their most valued content sources? And then the third we're going to round out with is what impact does a company's content have on the engineer's buyer consideration of a vendor that they want to do business with? So let's start, let's look at the most valued content types. All right. So we asked the question, how valuable are the following types of content when researching the latest engineering technologies, industry trends, and products? And case studies and white papers are in the top, which is what we'd expect. But I think some of the findings like ebooks and books, they may be different than what you'd expect. So as you look at this chart, you'll notice it's sorted by the very valuable rating of each content type, or these blue bars that are at the very left of each of the content types. So overall, of the 811 respondents, and we didn't talk about that, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that our end sample, our number of completes for the survey was really, really good, really strong. So over 800 respondents, and you saw, as Amber showed, mostly engineers, engineering management completing this. So really solid data across the board. So overall, of the 811 respondents across the world and across all age groups who answered the question, this particular question, the content type that they value most is, and Amber, if you can actually go back just a little bit, just on case studies and application notes, they value most is the case studies and application notes. That's a 38% rating in that blue bar, rating them very valuable. And then, or if you add the blue and the red, it's 75% that rated it very or moderately valuable. And then the third, sorry, I got my numbers wrong. The 38% rating for case studies and application notes, rating it very valuable, and a total of 81% for very and moderately valuable if you combine those, the blue and the red bars for case study and application note. And then the second is followed by longer copy ebooks. So that's where you see that second black bar around ebooks. 36% of engineers rated them very valuable, and a total of 75% rating it very or moderately valuable when you get both of those blue and red bars. And then the third, so this is the third box that you see around the books and white papers. So this third most valuable content type, it was really a tie when you round up, combining both the blue and the red bars. It was between books and white papers at around 73–74%, respectively. And so it's really interesting about this. So the case studies, white papers, those are content types that we see always popping up at the top. But I thought it was interesting to see that ebooks and books also show this longer copy type of content. And then as I go into the regional and the age, you'll start to see where the how-to videos and these videos over 3 minutes are starting to show up, and what's driving this macro data is in the details of age and region. I'll show that in just a minute. But before I move to the next slide, I want to actually point out something that I found really interesting about this slide. So on this one, I don't have it on the others, but on this one, I wanted to include data for ratings of not very valuable. That's those really small purple bars to the right. And if you just take a step back and you look at this chart for a second, you'll see that those purple bars for every single content type are really small. And so what I took away from this, we tend to look at the big bars and, where are the majority, and of course that's where I started, but I think it's really important to note that every single type of content had very small ratings for not very valuable. And so I think what is really important for all of us to realize with this is there is no silver bullet on what type of content to produce. The reality is engineers need information they can trust to do their jobs and solve the grand challenges they're facing. They are craving information. And so for all of us as marketers and business leaders and salespeople to do content marketing effectively, we've got to produce high quality content on a consistent basis. And I think this is the key for the point I'm trying to make here, in a diverse set of formats. And so I'm gonna go into some data next that shows this same question, the results by age and by geography. And what I hope that helps with everyone is, as you think about the particular ages of your personas or the regions that you focus on, that hopefully it will help you start to narrow down the types of content to prioritize. For the reality is, for companies that target a variety of regions or age groups, the information is going to, maybe be most helpful at the sales enablement phase, determining what content types to prioritize for maybe to be most effective for specific sales teams. And again, the full report will include more findings, but let's go ahead and look at the findings for this question around content types by age group and by region. All right, cool. So, okay, so looking first regionally, when we combine so when you're looking at this chart, you need to remember, so I took the blue and the red bars, the very and moderately valuable, and we merged them into one bar. So when you're looking at these bars, recognize that they all represent very or moderately valuable. So the biggest differences we see in the most valued content types are in Latin America by region, where engineers value ebooks and books more than any other content types. So Amber, if you build just one more time, you'll see, yeah, there you go. So ebooks and books more than any other content type. That's that red and the purple bars that you see there that Amber just had those black bars around. And then in the US and Canada, the second most valued content type is how-to videos over 3 minutes. So that's really interesting. So you remember on the overall chart, we saw how-to videos was like number 4 or 5, but when you start to get into this regional and age data, you start to see what regions or ages or age groups are driving some of those preferences. And so here we see the U.S. is a big driver of the how-to videos, and longer, over 3 minutes, which is interesting too. So again, it really reinforces the importance of diversity of format, and especially for enterprise companies that are targeting multiple markets or regions to be able to prioritize at that level. And so then looking at age, we see even more interesting differences. So the most valued content type across all age groups is case studies and application notes, just like we saw with the overall data set. That's that dark blue bar that's up there at the top of each of the clusters of age groups. However, as you see these, as you see the black bars kind of coming up, it's really interesting. The youngest age group, engineers 25 to 35, value, again, how-to videos over 3 minutes more than any other age group. So kind of seeing that similar to that US data that we saw. And then they're preferring white papers the least. And so that's that green bar that you see at 70%. So just really interesting to start to see the differences again by region and by age group on this, this question around most valued content types. So with that, then let's look at the most valued content sources. So where do they go to find information? So the specific question we asked was, how valuable are the following sources when seeking information on the latest engineering technologies, industry trends, and products? And so consistent with previous research we've done, the most valued content sources are online. And the first two, and we've seen this across the board in the research we've done across region, across the last few years, they are search engines and supplier vendor websites. So looking at the blue bars representing very valuable ratings, so that's how these content types to the left are sorted. They're sorted by the blue bar, which is very valuable. The very first, the most valuable one, 43% of respondents rated search engines as very valuable. And then it's interesting, there's more discrepancy here than the content types. There's a 6-point drop to the second most valued content source, or 37%, which is supplier and vendor websites. And then there's another 8-point drop to the third most valued source, which is online, again, and it's trade publication websites, with 29% rating this source as very valuable. And then interestingly, the next two content sources are both offline. They're traditional, or what you might hear referred to as outbound channels, and they were rated nearly the same, with 28% rating trade shows as very valuable, followed by 27% for trade print publications. And so I'd like to share some findings by geographic region where, again, just like the one before, when it's the devil's in the details in terms of what's driving these preferences. And I think we'll see this with the geographic data, some really interesting differences that I think are driving some of these findings at the macro level. So let's look at the geographic data for this question. So while most regions, again, followed the macro trends for the most valued content sources, again, Latin America showed some really interesting differences, as well as the UK, EU and UK and Ireland. So again, as you look at the data, keep in mind the charts combine both very and moderately valuable for each of these content sources. So engineers in Latin America value trade publications, both websites in the green that you see here with 86% and print in purple with 85%, so almost the same. They value these content sources more than any other content source. So looking at the region of Latin America. So interestingly, in contrast, engineers in the UK and Ireland value online sources, supplier vendor websites with 90% in the blue bar, and search engines with 88% in the red bar, more than engineers in any other region. And then engineers in the EU were the least to value trade shows. And for those of us who've done work in Europe, or those of you who are, I know, so we have people from Germany, Denmark, Finland, Canada, Cyprus. We have many of you on the call today from different regions of Europe, and even those in North America who are very familiar or working on our marketing programs and sales programs in Europe. It comes a little bit as a surprise to us about this low number of preference for trade shows in Europe, given the popularity of trade shows in countries like Germany. So it's interesting. So our sample sizes for each individual country, they're not large enough. I actually did a deep dive trying to look at preferences by country, but our sample sizes are just too small for any individual country to really draw meaningful differences at that level for most of the questions. But I did go into the raw data and I did look at this for a while, and anecdotally, responses for this study rating the value of trade shows, we're higher from engineers in Germany and lower in others such as Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. So I thought I would share that just as an anecdote. We're going to keep trying to do this research and keep trying to get our completes up so that we can get even more granular as possible. One thing I wanted to note, we did conduct a European-specific research study with our European partner Elector in the Netherlands just a few months ago, and they're actually releasing that report in just a week or two at the Productronica show. So for those of you in Europe or focused in Europe, you could check that report out as well, compare to what we are seeing in this report here, just to keep trying to learn. And like I said, we'll keep trying to study this too and getting our end samples up by region, but just really interesting data. So then let's look at the last slide here then by age group for content sources. So when we look across all age groups, again, supplier, so this is interesting, supplier vendor websites in the dark blue bar at the top of each age group cluster were the most valued content source. And then just coming off of talking about trade shows in the light blue bar on the bottom were the least valued. So additionally, technical trade publication websites, they're noted in the green bars, were valued more than trade print magazines, that is in purple. That was the case across all age groups too. So pretty interesting stuff. So, okay, I have one more finding I want to share, but before I do that, I want to pause and we want to do a poll. We want to hear from all of you, and we always want to encourage everyone to be sharing with each other. This is a really tough market to be doing marketing in, and we want to learn from each other. We want to share so we can be as smart as possible. So I thought I would take the opportunity to go ahead and do a poll. So I'm going to try not to mess this up. I'm going to select a poll, and I'm going to launch it. So you guys now should see a poll that comes up on your screen. And the question is, what are your two greatest content marketing challenges? And so I want you guys to be picking two. And there's 5 to choose from. And we've got about 10% voted so far, so you guys keep going. It's really interesting so far. So bandwidth from engineering subject matter experts, that SME that you see in that first question, that's what that stands for. So bandwidth from engineering subject matter experts at my company or my client, producing content consistently, lack of commitment to content from leadership, so not being able to get the resources, the budget, trying to convince your leadership team that, hey, we really need to invest more in content. So that's what that third one is. The fourth one, knowing what topics are going to drive traffic and leads. So, what do we need to write about? What do we want? What are our salespeople saying? What are the type of leads? What's our persona? What are their applications? What are they really challenged with? What are those topics that we know we need to be writing about? And then lastly, measuring the impact of content through the funnel. That's a really big one. So we have about 70% voted. So I'm going to give you guys just a few more minutes. If you guys are out there and you haven't voted yet, don't be that person that didn't go to the poll and vote. Cast your vote. Luckily, in a webinar, it only takes you about 3 seconds or maybe 5. We have about 75% voted, and I really want to get to at least 80 or 85. So I'm going to give you guys a couple more seconds. I'll tell a quick story while I'm waiting for you guys. So on this last one, measuring the impact of content through the funnel, which looks to be in maybe third place right now. We were just looking at Trew. We were looking at this really cool new feature. The marketing automation we use is HubSpot. A lot of our clients use HubSpot. Probably a lot of other marketing automation tools have this too. Now you can actually look at the originating piece of content that drove revenue. Really, really powerful intelligence that you can gather about measuring your content in software. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, we've got 83% voted. So I'm going to call it, and I'm going to close the poll, and then I'm going to share the results with you guys. So here's what we see. So there's really, it's the top 2, bandwidth from engineering subject matter experts, 51%, and producing content consistently, 49%. So this is consistent with polling I've done in the past. It's also very consistent with the results that have come out for the last number of years from Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Profs. Joe Polizzi and the folks at Marketing Profs have done a survey benchmarking content marketing for the last number of years. These two have continued to be the challenge, the top 2 challenges around content marketing. So really quick on bandwidth of engineering subject matter experts, the primary way for you guys to solve this is by repurposing your content. And I think at Trew, we could do another webinar on this again, but we have a whole methodology where we show how to get 10 to 15 hours from an engineering subject matter expert to produce one premium piece of content and turn that into 11 more pieces of content with very little additional time from that engineer. So repurposing is a really key way to solve that number 1 challenge. And then producing content consistently, it is absolutely critical that you have personas defined and you have a very clear content strategy. And that will give you the information that you need to know exactly what you need to be writing about. So, and then I already talked about measuring the impact of content. That looks to be the third, pretty close third. And boy, marketing automation, that's your answer. And if you're a small or medium-sized business, check out HubSpot or call us and we'll give you a demo, because that informs all of our measurement around the content we do at Trew and for all of our clients. So thank you, everyone. That was awesome. Really appreciate you guys voting. All right, I'm going to hide the results and we're going to go back to the webinar. All right, cool. So thanks, you guys. That was great. So let's then go to the final content-related question that I'm going to share findings on, and I'm going to pass it to Linda. Here's the question we asked. Agree or disagree, you are more likely to do business with a company that regularly produces new and current content. Amber, before you go to the next slide, I specifically wanted to have this be my last slide, because this slide, the data on this, it almost deserves a drum roll. It's just so informative and helpful for all of us doing content marketing. So if all of you could do a little drum roll on your desk, and then Amber, you go to the next slide. So here's what we see. We see, so the findings, as we found with the findings from the previous research, the vast majority of engineers want to do business with companies that are committed to content. So let's dive in and look at the specifics of this. So I've asked this question a few times now over the past several years, but I'm so pleased to see this. This is the highest percentage that I've seen yet from engineers who say that they want to do business with companies that regularly produce new and current content. 92% agree, which is in the red, or strongly agree, which is in the blue. That is incredible. And so, so while we face these great challenges with content marketing, it is really reassuring to know that it is truly a competitive differentiator. If we're committed to content, the technical market that you're targeting is more likely to do business with you than the competitors that you're facing in the market who aren't. So, and it's interesting, on this one, I don't have geographic or age breakdown because there really wasn't any significant difference. Engineers of all ages and all regions of the world want to do business with companies that produce high quality technical information that they can trust to help them solve the grand challenges they're facing in their applications. So as I like to say, content is the currency of marketing today. It's the fuel that drives that high performing website engine and produces results throughout your pipeline from the top all the way to enabling sales at the bottom. So findings I just shared, many more on content are going to be available in the full report. That wraps up my section of the webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda from IEEE GlobalSpec to share findings about the engineers' interactions with vendors along their buyer journey. Linda, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm super excited to be here with you and the folks on the phone presenting this part of the presentation. I am going to look at e-newsletters, subscriber behavior, the buying process, and the purchasing decision-making process. So let's get right to it. The first finding that we're looking at is nearly 50% of engineers subscribe to 4+ e-newsletters, and with engineers in the UK and Ireland subscribing to more e-newsletters than any other region. What this is telling me is that the e-newsletter is still a very effective part of the marketing mix. I'll break this down a little further in some of the subsequent slides so we can examine the regional difference. It's worth noting that this data correlates to the trends we see here at IEEE GlobalSpec, where the average number of newsletters subscribed to is in sync with this number. Next slide, please. This is the breakdown of how many newsletters engineers are subscribing to. And while 40% of engineers are subscribing to 2 to 3 e-newsletters, nearly 50% subscribe to 4 or more. Think about that. Think about what Rebecca spoke about earlier and the need to stay constant with regard to producing new and relevant content. This is the channel for that content. So you create the content once and you push it out in the relevant channel, like the e-newsletter, which is your valuable and cost-effective channel to get your content in front of your target audience. Here we're looking at regional differences, and we ask the same question, how many newsletters do you subscribe to? And the regions where the most engineers subscribe to 2 to 5 e-newsletters are the EU at 76%, the UK and Ireland at 74%, and the US at 72%. While engineers in the UK and Ireland subscribe to more e-newsletters than any other region, with 35% subscribing to more than 6. So my takeaway here would be that while e-newsletters continue to be extremely effective and valuable component, there's also implications for marketers to consider in the EU specifically, as we're all thinking about what's going to happen when GDPR goes into effect next year. It may be very efficient for you to work with a partner who's already taken the necessary data protection steps with regard to list management than to go it alone. Now we're looking at e-newsletter behavior in the inbox. And we ask the question, how do e-newsletters behave in your inbox? Consider the ones you subscribe to and trust, and that trust word's pretty important. And check the option that best fits. So when they receive e-newsletters in their inbox, Nearly 50% of engineers are scanning the subject lines that intrigue them and deleting the rest. 38% of engineers open most or all to scan for content or read every one. So I call this the mixed bag slide. The good news is that if you write a really good subject line, you have a much better chance of the rest of your message being read. The mixed bag is that even if you don't, 38% of engineers will scan through the content and read every newsletter. You need to use this opportunity carefully and create content that users actually want to read and engage with. So the next time they receive something from you, they'll look forward to receiving it and they won't be hitting that delete button. And here we're looking at regional differences. And so here we see that 59% of engineers in the US or Canada and 52% in India, Asia, or Russia are more likely than engineers in other regions to scan through the subject lines of the e-newsletters that intrigue them and delete the rest. And across all of the regions, very few engineers you'll see delete most e-newsletters automatically or filter them. And it is definitely worth pointing out, I get asked this a lot, about the regional differences, and especially with the highly sought after Americas region. And so we see this here, and a little bit more surprisingly in India, Asia, or Russia. I would not have expected that to be so high. So it's worth noting that while engineers have subscribed to and trust the source, they will not have any use for content that doesn't meet their interest or information needs. Now I'm going to talk about the buying process and what happens during that buying process online, which we all know, based on Rebecca's findings, is where a lot of the content needs to be and where engineers are interacting most. So for the majority of engineers, nearly 60% of the buying process happens online, from the early research to the final decision, before they speak to the company, before they speak to you. In the next few slides, I'm going to dig into what engineers are doing online during this process to give you some insight to help you shape your marketing plans and strategy. So we asked the question, when you are in the buying process for a new product or service for work, what best describes your preference? So remember, this is specifically about when they're in the buying process. So when they're in that buying process, they're relying on online search, talking to colleagues, and watching product videos. So it's a little bit different than what Rebecca showed you earlier, but this is because it's specifically targeted to when they're in the buying process. Only 14% prefer to talk to a salesperson early in their research. And you can see, some of the key points here about why do they do this? I want to look online. I want to compare things. I want to read content about products and services. I want to compare before I talk to a salesperson. And then I want to look to my peers, right? Peer insight is not to be underestimated with regard to the engineering community. And of course, and this does not surprise me, I want to watch videos about how the products work. It's a very common behavior. Next slide, please. So in thinking about the entire buying process for significant purchases you make for work, from early research to the final purchase decision, what percentage of the process happens online before you finally speak to somebody at the company? And so as you've seen on the previous slide, for the majority of engineers, nearly 60% of the buying process happens online before they speak to you, before you are even aware it's happening. And that's an important point. I want you all to think about that. And I'd also like to point out that at any given time, an engineer is working on multiple projects that are at different stages. So in one project, they might be in a conceptual stage. In another process, they might be in more detailed design stage. So this means that you need to have a consistent online presence. And I know that's one of the challenges we talked about earlier when you did the poll, with the messaging created to help facilitate product comparisons of things that they're doing, provide the technical specs, show them how your product works and how other engineers have been successful implementing it. And I also want to point out, it's not a one-way dialogue. think about what Rebecca said about the website being the engine, right? And you need to have the right fuel, and you need to be, maintain it properly. It's the same thing. You need to provide easy ways for your audience to interact and get their question answered, like commenting, feedback, peer reviews, or ratings. Other ways to ask questions, like online chat or text message. You really need to know your audience and create the compelling content that educates them, that entertains them, and engages them. And keep in mind that engineers are deeply creative people, and you need to communicate with them with intent, with clarity. And remember, the buyer is in control, as we spoke about earlier. So here we're looking at the same question, but with the regional differences. And the things that I'll point out here for you is that the UK, Ireland had the most engineers, indicate over 70% of the buying process happens online. And the Middle East, Africa had the least, 31%. So I sort of find that UK stat very interesting. And I think, and this is just a hypothesis, that this data is indicative of a cultural shift in the workplace, with engineering teams are stretched very thin, fewer staffers, less time and more projects, and it's different in these regions in the world. So we see a trend towards the preference to have all the facts at hand before they even take a meeting, and it's more pronounced in the Middle East and Africa. So I'm going to pause now, and I'm definitely going to be, I want your feedback at this point, and I'm going to test my GoToWebinar skills right here and launch another poll. And what I want to ask you some questions now with regard to your process for handing leads to sales, because in the next couple of slides, I'm going to, my last 2 data points will be around that. So I sort of want to take your pulse on what your process is. And so my question, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. So let me just go ahead and do that. Okay, so my question is on the screen right now: what statement best describes your process for handing leads to sales? And the first answer or selection is sales and marketing have agreed upon definitions and distribution. So it's really sales and marketing agreed upon definitions and distribution of what constitutes a lead, and the leads are distributed appropriately. That didn't all fit in there, so hence the shortened description. Option 2, we have lead scoring and nurturing processes in place. Option 3, we pass all leads to sales. And option 4, we do not have a defined process in place. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you, and I see you're doing a great job. Keep going. We have about 60% of you have put your votes in, and I'm going to leave it open a little while. I see the results are coming in. So far, it's looking like a lot of you are passing all your leads to sales as the number 1, followed closely by the sales and marketing have agreed upon definitions. And so I'm going to go ahead, we're about 74%. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Oops, and I'm going to share the results with you. Okay, so here you see the results of the poll you just took, and thank you very much for that. Our audience, you on the phone and participating with us globally, and thanks again for being here. When you think about what statement best describes your process for handing leads to sales, the number 1 selection is we pass all leads to sales. And so we're going to get into that on the next slide in terms of what does that mean for the organization and what does that look like. And I think that we see definite challenges around some of the other areas in here, like definitions. So I'm really pleased to see that the number 2 answer is that sales and marketing have agreed upon definitions and distribution, because that's super important. When you go into it with a plan and you agree about how you're going to rate somebody or what actually the definition of a lead is, it makes a difference in what happens to them afterwards and what types of information gets shared with them. So that actually makes me really happy that that came up as number 2, and then tied, neck and neck for number 3 and number 4 is we have lead scoring and nurturing processes in place, which is great, at almost 19%. And I think it shows us, the room to grow in with regard to that. And 19% of you, and the 19% of you who don't have a defined process in place, don't feel bad about that, because I know that just means that you have some work to do there. And we see this a lot, especially in organizations with marketers and sales folks, in engineering companies that may be run by a lot of technical people who rose through the ranks in engineering who may not have the same definitions of marketing. It's not an uncommon occurrence, but it is an occurrence that you can work towards the goal of getting those agreed upon definitions and distributions and processes in place. So thank you very much for that. And I'm going to go ahead and hide the poll and cover my last couple of slides. Let's see, hide, here we go. Okay. So let's go to the next slide, please. And here we're looking about what happens online. So how many interactions do engineers have with the vendor before communicating with them directly? And so this is the answer to the question I get asked quite frequently. How often should I nurture my prospect? The answer is that on average, you need 3 to 4 touches before they'll take the next step. And please note, the next step doesn't mean they will buy something from you. And that's the second most often asked question that I get is, how come my leads didn't convert to a sale? That's not always the intent. We need to educate our management teams and ourselves, on what our goals are and the value for these specific programs and why we need the budget we're asking for, because it's a process. It's not a one and done kind of situation. You need to take these people and bring them through, providing them progressively more information, and it's not an easy task. It's why we're all so busy all the time. Next slide, please. So here, the question is, in thinking about your purchase decision process for a significant product or service or work, so think, significant equals, high value money in terms of your product, how many interactions do you typically have with the vendor before communicating directly with the company? Visits to their website, that could be defined as emailing them, visiting a trade show booth, attending a webinar. So here we see that 53% of engineers have an average of 3 to 4 interactions with the vendor before communicating with them directly, while 15% have 5 interactions or more, and a third have 2 or more interactions. So if we did sort of the same, math like Rebecca did earlier, and we added up, the people who are having 1 to 2 interactions, 3 to 4, and then the top of the scale, you could see that it's pretty significant, the number of interactions that you need to have with a prospect to bring them along. How many times do you need to get someone to your website before they'll actually connect one-on-one to you? For the industrial and electronic space, the number is on the higher end of the spectrum. So what should you do? As marketers, we're all tasked with generating revenue. That's where we started talking about what our goals were. And this research is providing validation to you that just because someone clicked on a download and we captured their information, it doesn't mean they're ready to buy something. It's the #1 reason that we get those sales complaints about how, on the value of our MQLs. And we need to understand this and create these multi-touch campaigns and messaging to build trust and gather intelligence on what stage of the buy cycle these individuals are currently in. From, are they just interested? Is their intent there? Are they ready to purchase? Where, are they a loyal, customer who's coming back? So thank you again for attending this webinar. I'm going to hand this back to Erin, who's going to show you where you can get this report and more valuable resources. Erin?
Thanks, Linda. All right, so all of our resources are listed on the page. Go ahead and check this slide out for the top resources from Trew and from IEEE GlobalSpec. We will be sending out an email with a recording of the webinar, so you'll be able to grab more information from this slide after the fact. So we have a couple questions and a couple minutes to answer them. So I want to move on into our Q&A. If you have any other last-minute questions, we will answer them after the fact, so go ahead and pop them into that question pane. But for now, like I said, we've had a couple great ones come in. So our first question is, it's about that most likely to do business with a company that regularly produces new and current content. So how do you think this applies to a company that provides customized services in aerospace and defense, where most of the work is confidential? Rebecca and Linda, whichever one of you wants to answer.
Yeah, I can go ahead, and I actually saw that question in the chat pane. Erin, can you say the question again just one more time?
Yeah, so it's talking about when most people are likely to do business with a company that regularly produces new and current content, and how do you think this applies to a company that provides customized services in aerospace and defense, where most of that work is confidential? Right. It's a great question. You know, this in specific industries, you know, this is where we talk about geographic, we talk about age. We didn't really talk about industries. I saw another question from someone who said, what does the data look like if you pull manufacturing out? So that's not necessarily an analysis that we did by the industries of the respondents, but it's an excellent question. So confidentiality, I actually talk about this in my book a little bit because we do see this in Mil-Aero specifically. It's really hard to get those case studies and or to be able to share a lot of content that is deemed confidential, either by your customers or by your own company, about your IP and how you do service delivery in particular. On the case study side, in my book, I talk about good, better, best on case studies. And I would strongly encourage all of you who face challenges with getting customer approval to do case studies to consider doing them without the customer being named. And I explain how to do that in the book. In terms of your services and how to talk about those without sharing confidential information, I think you have to be able to share. And so what you have to decide, you have to prioritize what is confidential, where is the line where of information we can share, and where is the line where it gets to this confidential point, and just talk as much and produce as much content as you can where you speak to your services without giving away that confidentiality. I'll give you an analogy. I had a really good conversation with someone recently, actually at Parker Hannifin. We were talking about one of their top lead gens is, and actually it's not just Parker, it's at a lot of companies that do these kinds of products where it's an OEM product getting embedded into a bigger machine. And we see this with some of our clients too, where they can create CAD models that don't have all the details of the actual electronics product, all the electrical levels of the product, but it's enough for the person that's designing the bigger machine to be able to decipher if that product is going to work in their machine. So it's the same kind of analogy. You've got to decide where that confidential line is, and you've got to produce content up to that line. But don't let it hold you back from producing content, because again, the companies that have figured it out are going to be the ones that are going to beat you in the market. So maybe even go look at some other vendors that provide Mil-Aero services and see how they're doing it. Ones that are really progressive in content marketing, and try to get some inspiration and ideas from them.
Yeah, Rebecca, if I could just sort of add to that, I could piggyback on that. We do a lot of work with different, industries, and Mil-Aero being one of them. And so there's, to your point, there's things that you will say, and there's things that you won't say, right? So with regard to content, so we could give you some examples of content on our Electronics 360 site, for example, where we're working with a Mil-Aero vendor who had a life-saving material, and we created a story around that material with an interactive video. So it sort of intrigued the audience enough to think about, what is this? It could save lives. It could stop bullets. It could do all of these things. Show me a little clip of a video. How does it work, in action, and give me just enough information to then connect me directly with that supplier without giving out any trade secrets. You don't need to. So think about your, what is it, I would say, think about what is it that you want the content to do and where the person is in the buyer's journey. And then, if you can't do it yourself, work with a partner and look at what Rebecca said, look at others in your industry as well.
That's a great example. Great.
All right, well, I think we are out of time. We have a lot of great questions, but we'll make sure we go through them and send the answers to you all along with the recording. So thank you all so much for your time being here today. I know we really appreciate it. We hope you got a lot of value out of it. And I see a lot of questions coming through about the report and the recording, so don't worry, it's coming. All right.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody.
Right,
have a great day.
All right, thanks.